Now, Executive Suites with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. You see, we have a roundtable this week. I always like a good discussion show. We haven't done one of these in a while. And it's an interesting topic, admittedly close to my own heart, some new media ventures in Rhode Island. And we're going to talk about what they're up to, as well as the pros and cons, the challenges and the opportunities in that sector, with three people who know it quite well. Joanna Detz, she's the founder and editor of EcoRI News. Joanna, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Richard Asinof, founder and editor of ConvergenceRI.
Thank you, Ted.
And my former colleague at Providence Business News.
That's right.
So we know each other well. And Elizabeth McNamara, who founded East Greenwich News. Elizabeth, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the honor.
Absolutely. Oh, well, I don't know how much an honor it is, but I appreciate it. So you guys have an interesting cross-section of topics, as I was saying, and what you're doing. So let's start off. We're going to have each of them sort of explain what you do in your individual role so people at home can get to know that. So Joanna, I'll start with you. Give us a thumbnail sketch. How long has EcoRI News been around, and what do you do there?
So we founded in 2009, and we're a digital media website covering environmental issues in southern New England.
That was good and short. Well done. You make a good soundbite person. How big is the staff? What's your revenue model? Give us a look-see into how you put it together.
Yeah, so when we started, the staff was just two. It was my husband, Frank, who is a co-founder, and myself. And over the years, we've grown, and we now have 3 full-time reporters, myself, and about 5 freelance writers who cover the region for us. The funding model is it's mostly traditional. We incorporated as a nonprofit. We get about 40% of our funding from foundation grants, 20% from donors, and then advertising revenue also comprises a piece of our revenue stream. And we just launched this last year. We started experimenting with selling our content as a wire service to other media organizations. So our first customer, if you will, is the Westerly Sun, and so they have a subscription to our content for a calendar year, and we're testing that out to see how it goes.
So are people, maybe there's Westerly Sun readers watching, could they now be seeing EcoRI News
they could
articles
be seeing
in there?
it in the newspapers. So while we are digital, we also have a presence in print media too.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. That's really smart. So what's been, I know people talk, they see the stories. You guys will absolutely find stories other folks aren't on yet, and the great depth. I was researching the pipeline expansion recently, and you've done a lot of coverage on that. What's been the response? What's the audience like so far for you?
I'd say our audience is really fierce and really loyal. Our signature publication is an e-newsletter which goes out to 12,000 subscribers every week. And these are mostly people that we've met face to face. When we started, we had to build an audience from nothing, no brand. So we tabled at events, farmers markets, concerts, conferences, and we met these people and we told them our story and we signed them up for our newsletter. And so while we're digital, there's been a real human connection too, which I think has helped us along in terms of recruiting donors and reader loyalty over the long term.
And when you think back, before we turn to Richard, when you think back to '09 when you and your husband were talking about doing this, apart from saying, well, should we bet the farm on this project, what did you see as the opportunity there? Obviously there are people, other people covering environmental news. What did you see as the where you could get in there?
The opportunity at the time, I think, was the digital platform itself. For a very low cost, all you needed was a website. I'm a graphic designer and branding strategist by trade, so I was able to build a website, and we could get off the ground and just start. We naively thought we could get some seed money. We did not. So, you know, we were built on perseverance, persistence, and grit for the first year and a half, really, while we got this thing off the ground.
A lot of sweat equity, and I think that'll be a theme around this table today. Richard, let me turn to you. Your venture is called ConvergenceRI. Same question to you. What's the thumbnail sketch? What do you do there?
It's a weekly online digital newsletter that works on a subscriber base that covers the convergence of health, science, innovation, technology, research, and community writ large, and tries to break down the silos the way the news is normally covered and bring them together into one conversation.
Now, I know you were covering healthcare, life sciences when we were both at Providence Business News. Well, sort of like I was saying, asking Joanna, what was the opportunity you saw there? Clearly you saw some siloing and you thought these things crossed over?
There was a great opportunity, as the more I talked with people, particularly in the healthcare or the innovation field or the emerging biotech industry, they were frustrated that they couldn't get a good story about what was really going on, that everything was limited. And they appreciated when I would come in and talk with them and ask them questions, and they would say, wow, you really get this stuff. And I said, yeah. And then there was one of those big events that PBN has where they brought everybody together for a health summit. And I realized that it was all being done on the basis of my work. I was the reporter. I was covering all the stories. I ended up writing the questions for the panelists. And I sort of said, wow, if they can do this.
Funny how that happens in this industry, right?
Right. If they can do this, why can't I do that too? And what I found was that I wanted to do it as a digital model. I didn't want to be involved in print. And I wanted to create a format that worked digitally. So in addition to having an in-depth story, I also invented 3 sidebars. Why is this story important? The questions.
Yeah, you always have on the side of those stories, I read your stories, that sort of the quick thumbnail for people who don't have a lot of, maybe if they don't have a lot of time or they want a summary.
Right, but it also provides the context and the subtext to make everything transparent and real, so you understand there are some issues behind what this story is, and here are the questions that haven't yet been addressed. And doing that for every story, people love it. That's great feedback because they can't get that type of insight and analysis anywhere else. And then if you have more time, you can
read the full story. Like all our reporters, we hope you read to the end, right? How has the response been to it so far, and how long have you been doing it?
We launched in September of 2013, and the response has been really remarkable. You know, I had my list of early adopters who I went to. The model is disruptive. It says that I'm not going to go after advertising initially. I'm going to go after subscribers, and I'm going to go after more institutional subscribers, people who are sort of the nodal points in networks, because the way that information flows best in a digital world is when you share it across your networks. And so I can say that out of the initial 35 to 40, you know, early adopters, all of them have renewed their subscriptions over the last year, which is great. And you know, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I have more than 120 subscribers. But the difference is that they share it among their networks. So if there's a link to my newsletter that goes out with the newsletter from the CEO to a hospital system to all 13,500 employees. It doesn't mean all his employees read the newsletter or all his employees click on Convergence, but it's there and it's possible.
That is interesting. And Elizabeth, I want to get you in too before the break. Your situation is a little different. I know you because you were a reporter. First you were at 02918, right?
02818.
02818. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the folks in East Greenwich. And then you were at the Patch network of hyperlocal websites. And then you branched out on your own. You created East Greenwich News. And everyone says nobody knows that town better than you do. Independent website. You did recently put it on hiatus. We're going to talk about that. But first, tell me about the vision and what East Greenwich News was doing when you were doing it all the time.
So the idea behind East Greenwich News was basically to just provide that, not quite 24/7, but almost, feed for the town, for the community on what was going on. And this would be everything from town government and schools and police, always popular, police, you know, fire. But also business. People love to read stories about new businesses on Main Street, for instance.
Retail stories, I always find too. People love retail news.
They really like it. And you know, and so I had been doing that for Patch. I'd been doing that for my 02818, and but when Patch kind of changed its model and pulled back in terms of staffing, I realized there was just a void. So I thought, I know my readers. I know the people in this town. I live in East Greenwich, and I always would say that I walk out the door and walk down to Main Street and come home with 2 or 3 stories. You know, so it seemed like kind of an easy thing to start. Kind of what both of you said. It's inexpensive to start online. You know, you don't have to pay for paper and printing and getting it out. And one step followed another, and suddenly I was doing it every day, and then sending out my own kind of handmade, not handmade, but my own written newsletter to my they weren't subscribers in a pay sense. There were a few people who donated that way, but basically my mailing list, and just kept doing my thing, and it worked to a certain extent. But the business piece, I was having trouble with.
And I know, and that's where you ended up and why you went on hiatus, right? Because it was interesting when we talked a little while before that. You told me there was an audience. You clearly found an audience for it, right?
There is an audience. I mean, if in terms of I had 1,000 people subscribe to the newsletter, and this is a small community. It's 13,000 people, so 1,000 people were getting that newsletter every day. The click-through rate was, the open rate was really high. That's just how many people actually look at your, open your email. And then anybody who clicks through, they both were really great numbers. And the numbers from, just the metrics, the unique visits and all that was really good. However, I was more interested, and this happens, I've talked to a lot of people who are in this business. It's hard for somebody like me. I love the journalism part. Right. I sold some ads, but not enough, and how many hours in the day, and so that's kind of where that went.
All right, we're going to take a break. We come back, we're going to talk a little more with Elizabeth about what she saw as the challenges for East Greenwich News and the potential future. Maybe it'll be coming back, as well as some of what they're up to at EcoRI and Convergence. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and we are talking today about some new media ventures in Rhode Island and the business models as well as the stories that they're covering and what they're working on. And my guests are Joanna Detz. She's co-founder, can't leave your husband out, co-founder and editor of EcoRI News. Richard Asinof, he is founder and editor of ConvergenceRI, as well as other hats he has to wear at any startup. And Elizabeth McNamara, who founded East Greenwich News. And Elizabeth, we were talking before the break about when you decided, I think in April, to put the site on hiatus. It was taking up so much time, and the business side of it just wasn't coming together the way you wanted it to. But you did call it a hiatus. What's happened since then? Update us. Any chance it can come back? You had a lot of people who loved it down there.
Yeah, I will say I've had a lot of feedback. I've had people reach out and ask, beg me to come back. Some people have offered some help. One of the reasons I decided hiatus was I just felt like I was running so fast all the time that I couldn't really see the whole picture. I needed to kind of get outside to be able to see how it might get fixed, how it could possibly go forward or not. One of the things I was thinking of doing was doing kind of a subscription drive. It would be not a paywall at all, but what you guys do basically, which is try to get people to subscribe and donate, let's say $5 a month, which is I think what I donate to your organization, and get a group of those people, get that would be one part of it. But I'd still need, as I heard from you, saying yours is grant funding because you're a nonprofit, and then subscribers, and then advertising. So for me, it would have to be that answer would have to be, subscribers and advertising. And advertising takes time, so I still would need to find that person that could be kind of a partner in that way. And some people have gone the nonprofit route with local community news too, and not sure. Yeah.
And what have you found in terms of the challenges, Joanna, of it? I know there's a lot of upsides too, but what have you seen on that front?
Well, I think nonprofit is it's attractive, but it doesn't mean you don't have to run your organization like a business. Grants are great, but you can't rely on them. They're here 1 year, and the next year you can't get them. So our goal is ultimately actually to wean ourselves from grants. Most nonprofit news organizations receive about 50% grant funding. We're at about 40%, so we're almost average in terms of grant funding. But we really want to build those donor subscribers because that's the most sustainable revenue stream in the long term. So it means growing the audience and getting those people really loyal, so loyal that they're willing to give you a couple of bucks a month, maybe more.
And Richard, what have you seen in terms of the challenges as well as the upsides of going this route?
One is being really clear about what your market is. And so that I had a market that nobody else was covering, and nobody else has really gone there yet. Hopefully not for a while. And what I could bring to it was really good reporting skills and analysis that was missing. So I was able to create great traction from the people who and I can't come up with a good term for who they are, but they're the people who really you want to influence their decision making, and they are looking for that. So at 6:45 on Monday morning, I have a very impressive list of people. It's a go-to read that people will find me, and I can tell who's there. And even some people who are not necessarily subscribers, but they find it because they want to find out what's going on. A lot of people in the news media do that. The challenge is, for me, it took for my business plan that I developed, sometimes takes a lot longer to close the deal. You expect that you're going to be able to sell a subscription 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Sometimes it takes 6 months. And it takes persistence, and it's finally getting those people to the point that they understand the model and they like it. The hardest part for me is getting people to share. If collaboration is hard, it's even harder for people to share across their networks. They're used to scarcity, and that's not the way information flows. If you're younger, you understand that you share everything, you don't worry about it. The world is a Facebook page. That's not necessarily true yet in the business community. They're getting there, but so it's hard to get people to share on a regular basis.
And we have to go to a break, but I have to ask, how did you determine the pricing on the subscription, and what did you end up going with?
I figured out, some of that's proprietary, but I figured out in terms of number of employees and number of people in the network versus what was affordable for people, and doing it on a yearly basis. And the next really big step for me is moving towards advertising on a consistent basis, which I hire people as consultants, and my next big move will be to have somebody besides me selling advertising.
Always the dream to have someone else do that.
Let me know when you find that person.
And me too.
Yeah, you could work for all three of them. All right, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we are going to pick the brains of these smart journalists about some of the big stories on their beats, so you won't want to miss that. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and we are talking this week about 3 new media ventures in Rhode Island, as well as the broader world of new media opportunities and things happening out there in the news world. And we're talking with Joanna Detz. She's co-founder and editor of EcoRI News. Richard Asinof, he's the founder and editor of ConvergenceRI, and Elizabeth McNamara, who founded East Greenwich News. And Joanna, I promised before the break we'd ask each of you for some stories that are high up that you've been following that are interesting lately. What comes to mind for you?
Well, back in January, we reported that there were PEDs, those are performance-enhancing drugs, found in the Providence water supply. They were trace amounts, but it was slightly alarming, and the story kind of blew up. And we've been requesting data, and we're kind of combing through that, and we're hoping to do a follow-up in the coming months, just to see, what's going on there. I mean, people get really wound up when their drinking water has something in it that's
now,
not
is
supposed to be
that
there.
surprising? Has that happened in other places? I don't know much about what you find if it was a trace amount.
I think with more people living near our water supplies, more impervious surfaces, stuff is running off. It's entering the water supplies more easily, and so we're starting to see
enhancing drugs.
Yes.
Shouldn't I be more athletic
Steroids.
by now while
Steroids.
drinking the Rhode Island?
Well, there were a lot of jokes. It was an incredibly shareable story because everyone had a joke and wanted to weigh in on this. So
right, you get both the serious people care and all of us saying, well, why are my muscles bigger at this point? Richard, how about you? Convergence, all right, that nexus you talk about, what's interesting on your beat?
The deal flow in the biomedical industry world. There have been a number of stories that have come out that haven't really gotten the attention they should. What's happening at Illuminos and its clinical trials.
Coming up on Executive Suite in a few weeks.
Also with Annie DeGroot and Epivax, the fact that they have an opportunity to manufacture a flu virus for H7N9 flu with a Connecticut firm using their redesigned vaccine. And there are 2 or 3 other stories that I know about that I can't talk about, but it really shows the way in which the biomedical industry in Rhode Island is really positioned to be a star in the economy. And for whatever reason, it hasn't really gotten the traction within state government.
So are you bullish on that, the opportunity, the innovation economy? We hear about it a lot. Talking to these companies, what are you thinking about its prospects?
Well, you got to follow the money. There's $250 million of research money that comes in every year. I think it's so steady you could probably bond it. I don't want to go there. There are companies with really exciting potential that are sort of on the verge. And when you have the academic medical research organizations that are there, and you have the companies, and you have real talent here, which is different than having a factory that manufactures T-shirts.
Right.
There's real staying power here, and the people are incredibly talented in Rhode Island because it's small enough and it's positioned well near Boston, New Haven, and New York, has a real opportunity to grow its own culture.
Interesting. And Elizabeth, let's ask you, you know East Greenwich and its environs pretty well. What's interesting down there right now?
I found in the last several months, or really more than a year, that it's parent engagement that has been driving a lot of the interesting stories.
How so?
Parents have mobilized. Some said that they kind of took over this. Some of them took over the school committee. I don't know if it was that so much, but very specific interests, like later school start times for middle school and high school students. You have a couple of people who live in East Greenwich who happen to be sleep specialists who got on the bandwagon, and other parents who just thought it was the right thing to do.
Has it happened?
It has kind of happened. The school committee is committed to doing it a year from now.
Interesting.
And they have to figure that out. So that'll be a challenge.
God bless them. I would have loved that when I was in high school. Only about 30 seconds left. I'm curious, Elizabeth, have you seen that same engagement on those hot button issues we hear about, like testing and the standardized tests and that?
Some testing. There, in terms of students who were opted out of the new park testing, the numbers were probably a little lower in Rhode Island overall than the rest of some parts of the nation. But in Rhode Island, there were, I think it ended up being more than 50 kids who ended up opting out of the park.
Interesting. All right. Well, 3 interesting stories to follow, and if you Google these folks, you'll find their work online. Joanna Detz, she's from EcoRI News. Richard Asinof, he's from ConvergenceRI, and Elizabeth McNamara, she's from East Greenwich News, which we hope is back up and running with a massive staff before we know it. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for watching Executive Suite this week, and every week we'll be back next week. And as you know, we are now available as a podcast on iTunes. If you want to subscribe, you can get it in your pocket every week. See you next week back here on Executive Suite.